The Adulting with ADHD podcast is not a substitute for medical advice. Please see a medical professional if you think you have ADHD or if you have questions about your current treatment. To support this podcast or to access the podcast archives, visit patreon.com/adultingwithadhd. This is the Adulting with ADHD podcast, self-empowerment for people with ADHD.
I'm very excited to have with me today Dr. Joan Samuels-Dennis. She's a psychotherapist and author. Nice to have you, Dr. Joan.
Oh, it's so great to be with you, Sarah. Thank you so much for inviting me.
And today, to set this up a little bit, we've been talking about ADHD and trauma, as a lot of us have both, and sorting all that out. And I was really intrigued by the work you do. And my first question would be how you got into this work.
Yeah, if I'm to go back to even the early days of my initial practice, I'm a registered nurse. And so when I put the disclaimer out, I say I'm an RN psychotherapist. And in my work, I was working with a lot of people, single mothers, mostly on social assistance, who had experienced a lot of trauma. And as a nurse, sometimes you go out, you do these home visits, but you're like, how do I actually help this person in a real way? Because it's their trauma that's actually the problem. So I would then pursue all the way up to my doctorate, an intervention. I wanted an intervention that would help people actually recover, not just decrease their symptoms, but actually overcome every single symptom that they were experiencing that we call mental illness, that I call just a trauma response. And so I began that journey with my PhD. I finished my PhD, Sarah, feeling like didn't quite do the thing I set out to do. And if you want something good and well enough, then you cascade it out and you start marching towards it. So eventually I would discover a therapeutic modality called new decision therapy. And after discovering that, I then took new decision therapy into all of these different areas and really did a second PhD where I created becoming therapy, which incorporates a little bit of tapping work, energy work, a little bit of really diving into the pain, and then also then forgiveness. So the combination of these elements, using the body memory to even hone in on when did this trauma occur, that all came together over the last 7 years. And so now I have this slogan that I use, that in 3 sessions, I'm going to end the pain. And in 7 sessions, I'm going to give you the tools and the resources to make permanent life change. So as I have come to this place now, one of the things that I focus on is what we call the mirror.
Wonderful. That brings us to my next question, which is, what's the mirror? What's mirror neuron therapy, which is one of your modalities, correct?
Yes, yes. So if you can think about this, all of us have experienced a trauma. And so I don't define the trauma by the event alone, because you and I can experience the same event and have quite different responses. And mine might be a traumatic response, whereas yours might be like, oh God, that was a terrible thing, but then you move on really quickly. Mm-hmm. So the traumatic response is one in which I feel overwhelmed, like almost like a wave has crashed over me, I'm breathless. I feel afraid. So then I have these processes in the body, in the mind, even in the spirit that happen because I'm afraid. And so I have the fear, the flight, the fight, the freeze response. And then in addition to that, then I might feel panicked, like the actual scream is what I call the panic. And then beyond that, we might feel like we're being punished, right? And in a very unjust way. So when you're in a moment like that, there is a frozen image that is created. And some of us have a visual image that is, it's moving, but most of us have a frozen image, and that's really the mirror. So the mirror contains what went wrong. It contains the people who wronged you. It contains yourself, of course. It contains the people who should have rescued you. It contains all the words that were spoken in that moment, all the beliefs that were formed in that moment. And so what I do is I help people to go in, look at that frozen frame, that image that is still in their mind, and then look at all the different parts of that image, and then eventually smash it so that the trauma response that erupted in that moment is totally dissolved.
That's super fascinating. As you were talking, I think I've actually done this in a hypnosis session. Now that you're talking, I'm like, oh,
yes,
now I know what it is.
Yes, right. So we're all using the mirror. Some of us as psychotherapists know that we're talking about it, and some of us don't, quite frankly. And then when you're doing hypnosis, really what you're getting the person to do is to look at the mirror. And the thing about the mirror is it's reflecting, right?
Mhm.
And then a lot of times the mirror is reflecting at us. So the trauma that happened to us, because that's where our focus is, it reflects back on us. So oftentimes what we do is we re-experience through whatever modality, we re-experience people that look different, but they all fit the parts of the puzzle of the mirror. And we meet the person who punished us or we felt did something wrong to us. And we're like, why am I meeting this person again? And it's because the mirror hasn't been smashed. And then you meet the people that you were supposed to rescue you, the people who were supposed to show up and say, that was so wrong, I'm so sorry you experienced that, and the people who were supposed to say to the other person, you did wrong. We want to experience those people, but hardly do they show up. So what we have to learn is that we're the rescuer. Right?
Oh, I love that.
And that we are supposed to rescue ourselves. So once we smash the image and learn about all the parts of ourselves in that image that we've actually adopted and now project outwards and then attract the same image, then once we smash it, then we change the image altogether so that now we infuse love rather than fear. Now we infuse the protector and the rescuer rather than the person who didn't show up. And now we don't meet the person who is persecuting us anymore, because we're not going to enter the cycle of becoming a victim again. So it forces us to make some new decisions. And the way that we smash the mirror is really with, first of all, knowing where it exists. And then second of all, being able to say, I forgive you, I release you. As I release you, I also release myself from this. And so the smashing of the mirror in all the different places plays themselves out.
I love that so much. I can imagine the benefits, but why don't you tell me in your clinical experience what the benefits have been?
At the end of a session, because we usually select one moment in time, let's talk about, for example, a person who experienced childhood abuse. Let's even go as far as sexual abuse, maybe even rape as a child. And if you think about all the things that can happen in a moment like that, we experience something called dissociation. When a moment is absolutely overwhelming, where there's that scream and that panic, you can imagine yourself departing from your own body. That's what we call dissociation. So for the person who is screaming and running, but you're still present, you're experiencing, the body is experiencing it, but you've left the building and you are running. So for those people, what can sometimes look like ADHD, inattention, it's really about, okay, is that really inattention, or is it that the person hasn't returned back to their body? And so when you go through the process of actually helping the person visualize, see what happened in slow motion, call themselves back to the body, then what you get is this sense of oneness. That's the first thing. So unity with self is so important, right? And so if you're unified with yourself, all of a sudden you can stay and you don't become inattentive.
I don't know if you've ever been put on a waiting list, but therapy is hard to come by these days. If you need therapy and you need someone to talk to, consider BetterHelp. I've been using BetterHelp on and off since the pandemic, and it's honestly been really helpful when I can't reach my normal therapist. To save 10% off your first month, visit betterhelp.com/ADHD-adulting. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/ADHD-adulting.
And so some of the behaviors that you've learned, which is disappear as soon as things get stressful, now you can stay as soon as they get stressful. And you can then overcome the stress quite quickly because you're now present. So presence is one of the benefits. And then in addition to that, people who've been experiencing what I call the long cry depression. So the long cry ends once you're able to really dive into the pain of that moment, once you're able to see what you've been crying about, you calm your younger self. If your younger self is 5, if your younger self is 10, if your younger self is 15, 20, however old you were at the time that you experienced that trauma, Now you can calm yourself. You're the rescuer. So now you can say, I am so sorry that you had to experience that. I am so sorry that you've carried all of that with you all of this time. I am so sorry that I've departed from you and I wasn't here for you all of this time. I will be now. And as you become the rescuer for yourself, what you find is you stop crying.
Wonderful.
The other thing is the long worry, anxiety, right?
Yeah.
The long worry is anxiety. What does the future look like? I'm not safe. I'm not protected. No one is here for me. I am alone. I can't be here. I can't be here. I can't be here. So you say all these messages to yourself. And so you worry then, as I look into the future, will I be there for me? That's what we're all wondering. We're thinking, we're wondering, will somebody else be there for me? But really the worry is, will I be there for me? So you come to yourself and you say, I am here for you. I am with you, like to the very end. From the beginning, I might have interrupted that and separated from you and gone off away from you. But now I'm here and I'm with you to the very end. And when you're with yourself, then you stop the long worry as well. The future becomes secure. So a lot of the clients, they overcome their anxiety within those 7 sessions that I do. And then in addition to that, when people are triggered, like PTS, the startle effect, suddenly when you look at the visual and you remember, how did I respond in that moment? Were my eyes wide open? Did something actually hit the ground? Did a plate crash? Did something else happen? Was I hit in a certain way? And as you see it all in slow motion, it finally makes sense why you're afraid of certain things, startled by other things. The noises, the memory of the noises that happened in that moment, even someone swallowing can be a trigger. And as you remember, oh, that person swallowed at that particular time. They had a particular sound that they made as they came in. As you remember it all, because you have the capacity to, then all of a sudden the startle effect goes away. And beyond all the symptoms, Sarah, a lot of people, as they go through this process, they finally come to a place where they're not so distracted by their traumas that now they feel like they have a clear sight and a clear view. And suddenly the things that they've always wanted to do, now they have the power to do it. No more hesitation, no more procrastination, all of those things that have been with them, they suddenly overcome it. And now they're able to forge forward with a real energy. So I've talked enough, sorry.
No, my family was just coming in behind me, but no, this is all very wonderful. So are there any drawbacks to this? Or is there anything we should consider before we dive into this kind of work?
It is, especially the first 3 sessions, it is really heavy work. So imagine me asking you the question, if you had to think about the biggest struggle right now, what is your biggest struggle? So most people can think about that. Work is my biggest struggle. I feel stuck. Some people can say, I feel like really tired and exhausted all the time. So then I say, okay, so tell me what's been happening. And as they speak, I'm looking really for, what are they saying? What are they drawing my attention to in their language, in the symbols that they're using? So I'm exhausted. So there's a burden on me. It's heavy. So I start to get them to say those kinds of words. I feel heavy. I feel worn down. And as they draw into that, I'm getting them to draw into the most painful points of each of those statements. So as they draw into the most painful points of each of those statements, they literally start to cry. Their bodies begin to react in a certain way. It can be pretty scary to stay in your pain for a very long period of time. But once you can stay in the pain and then move with me through it, then we open our eyes and now we look at all the pieces of the puzzle. And so sometimes if you're looking at the pieces of the puzzle, all of the emotions that you would have experienced back then, they come right in. And so it can be a really hard thing to, again, look at it. But once you move through the pain and then look at the image and then come to the place where we forgive it and release it. When you say that statement, I let go, I release it. And if you can actually picture yourself with a hammer and a mirror in front of you and you are smashing it, and as you smash it, there's this liberation that comes. The hardest part of the process is really self-forgiveness. because you then have to look at, how have I been doing this to myself? And yet it's hard, and yet it's liberating. So the person coming into this, they have to be vulnerable. They have to be prepared to face the pain, and they have to be willing to walk with me through it. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time and a couple of sessions to actually get ready. So some people need the regular talk therapy first, and then they can actually enter the process with me. And I'm okay with that. You don't get the same results with talk therapy because you're really like just processing or just re-talking about something that you think, but you don't yet know. And so the hardest part is to sometimes be in the pain and then have someone walk with you through the pain and then see yourself. So the vulnerability is necessary, and the willingness to be guided is necessary. And you have to want, you really have to want to get better. You have to be uncomfortable with the pain you've been comfortable with all of this time.
As you're talking, I'm thinking of the own trauma work that I've been doing. And this next question, full disclosure, it's my question.
Sure.
How do you know when your trauma work is done?
Sarah, it's your question, but I think I've had to think about that question myself, because part of being a good therapist and a trauma recovery therapist is that you have to process your own traumas as well. And I think when the triggers don't come anymore, and does that ever happen? Are there splinters of the mirror that you don't get? Certainly there could be. But I think there's a point when all of us go, I'm done looking at that now. And I'm totally replacing it with a different mirror. And here's what that mirror is. So I think the trauma work is done when you're able to not just focus on you and your traumas, but you're also focusing on the lessons that came from that trauma. And then as you focus on the lessons that came from that, you think about your tribe. And like your tribe are the people who've gone through the same things that you have gone through, but you are now going to use your own experience to say, hey, I went through that and I didn't know what the problem was. I didn't even know how to solve it. But now that I've gone through it, can I tell you my story? Can I possibly help you? And in some way, shape, or form, you help them. It's like you slingshot them. As you had to walk slowly, but now you can like slingshot them into the place of healing. So I think when you get to the place where you start focusing on that, I think you've reached the point where you overcome your trauma.
That's wonderful. And I'm thinking of all my listeners right now, and I want to know how they can connect with you if they're hearing you right now.
Yes, you can connect with me through my website at drjoan.ca. I have a forgiveness workbook that if folks want to start the self-healing journey, they can go to theartoflettinggo.ca. And so they can also access me there. And if you want to connect with me on Psychology Today, you'll find me there. On Instagram, I'm at Becoming Beautiful I Am. And those are probably the three spots to find me.
Wonderful. I will also hyperlink these in the show notes. Dr. Joan, thank you so much for being here today. This was such a wonderful conversation.
Oh, it was a pleasure.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.